Candlemas is the traditional end to the Christmas cycle, celebrated 40 days after Christmas. It was actually on February 2nd, but we're just going to transfer to today. It's why long after almost everyone else in Toronto has taken down their Christmas decorations, a few of us, and especially us at Church of the Transfiguration, have left ours up. It's considered a major feast in the church calendar, but it's sort of become a bit of a forgotten feast. It's about Jesus as light, and we bless the candles that we will use in the church in the coming year, which is why we blessed all of these candles at the start of the service. In the past, before electricity and lights and all those good things, you would have brought your candles, and they would have been blessed as well. I wonder if this feast has been forgotten because of some of the themes that came with the Reformation, when the Western Church divided itself. When I met Yvonne in Ottawa, we attended an Anglican church which was founded simply because someone had dared to put candles on the altar. And this was entirely too popish for some people in the parish, and they decided, we're going to go down the road and start a new church with no candles on the altar. And of course, 100 years later, this was highly amusing to me because there were lots of candles on the altar and in the sanctuary, and clearly candles had become an important part of their own worship as well. Later in the service, we are going to have an opportunity to remember some of our own history, and it's good to look back, to learn, to be inspired, and to see how we've changed. But first, let's take a moment and talk about Jesus as light. As our gospel recounted, Mary and Joseph are in the temple in Jerusalem. They are following the law of Moses. They are there to present their firstborn son as an offering. In their case, it's 2 pigeons, which reflects their humble and lowly status. It's a practice that followed the story of Abraham and Isaac, which we have so beautifully depicted in the stained glass in our own church. But the ritual is not the focus of the gospel today. Jesus is the focus, even though he doesn't say anything and he doesn't do anything. But it's his presentation in the temple that motivates Simeon and Anna to speak. They hold in their arms a small bundle of a baby and declare, "Here is the one who brings peace. Here is the one who will reveal the inner thoughts of many. Here is the one destined for the rising and falling of many, and here is the one to praise." So our gospel is both a comfort and a challenge for us. And I want to comment today on Jesus as light in 3 ways. Jesus as a light that comforts, Jesus as a light that challenges, and finally, Jesus as a light that invites us. Jesus, a light that comforts. We have in our church an extremely unique feature. Instead of a candle in the sanctuary that burns constantly, we have an LED light that shines upon Jesus. When I am here late at night, I always appreciate how the church is actually never in total darkness. There's always light shining here, always a light shining on Jesus' face. This practice of leaving a light in the sanctuary is known as having a presence light, or sometimes a presence lamp. It is meant to be a comfort, meant to remind us of God's promise to be with us, meant to symbolize that no matter what happens, God's light cannot be extinguished in our lives. In the Old Testament, this was the presence light that was kept in the tent of meeting, which moved about as the people of Israel wandered from Egypt to the Promised Land. And later in the temple in Jerusalem, candles were always lit on the altar. The beginning of John's Gospel keeps us in that tradition of God's presence as light, but puts it in the new context of Jesus. Jesus is the light which enlightens everyone, and the Word became flesh who lived among us. But if you strip away some of the translation of the text, it actually says something a little bit more like, the Word became flesh and pitched a tent among us. As a camper, this is good news. But what John is really doing is getting back to that idea that through Jesus, God is dwelling with his people. The tent of meeting is now found in Jesus. As we travel through life, God will travel with us. It is no coincidence that in today's gospel, Jesus is declared light to the people in the temple itself. For Luke, our evangelist, Jesus is light and glory precisely because he is the light and glory of God made present in a new way for God's people. Jesus' presence, even as a little baby, is meant to comfort us. God has come to dwell with humanity. Are you ready to meet him in your life? Jesus' light as a challenge. In the Epiphany season, the central story is that of the Magi from the east, who saw the star shining in the night sky and followed it to Jesus. The Epiphany season holds this theme of light from beginning to end, starting with the light of the star and ending with the light of Jesus, transfigured into a dazzling brilliance atop a mountain with Peter, James, and John. But the curious thing about the Magi and the Transfiguration is that the challenge they present to us is difficult to grasp. The Magi challenge us because you would not expect outsiders from a different realm to be the ones who recognize the sign of God's Son. You would think that there would be better candidates. And to be perfectly honest with you, the story of the Magi is not so straightforward. The Magi follow the star to Jerusalem, but they require the help of Herod and the scribes to make that final mile of their journey. I think the story of the Magi is a challenge for two reasons. First, because it tells us that God is able to reveal divine light to all people in all places, and not just to expected people in expected places. And second, because it tells us that God is able to use, for the purposes of good, people such as Herod, who intend to act maliciously. Remembering in our own lives that God can be revealed in unexpected places and that God's purposes can still be achieved through unexpected people should train our eyes to search for the hints of divine light at work in all aspects of our life. The story of the Transfiguration, obviously a very popular story in this place, well, it represents a different challenge. The disciple Peter has rightly recognized that Jesus, transfigured into glorious light, is important, and he wants to stay put. And so he offers to build 3 tents so that everyone can remain in this heavenly glow forever. But Jesus tells him, forget the tents. We're going back down the mountain, back to the people, back to work. So often, when we alight upon a moment of divine brilliance, we have the reaction of Peter. We want to stay put, to savor it. The story seems to tell us that the glory of the mountain peak moments when Jesus transfigures our life are important. But the journey of faith challenges us to continue down the mountain. Things don't always glow or shine in life, and that really is a challenge. But the promise that bit by bit, Jesus will transfigure us in that same light is an important lesson that brings our season of Epiphany to a close. Jesus' light as an invitation. I think the real point of blessing candles on Candlemas is to invite us to see what the light represents, and that is Jesus. Do we recognize in our lives the presence of Jesus? Do we see Christ in our midst? Are we like the Magi who are searching in the darkness, or like Simeon and Anna who are waiting in prayer and devotion? Are we perhaps more like the scribes and Herod, or the other people who are in the temple that day but pay no heed to what was happening with the Holy Family? Are we people who fail to see the signs of the presence of Jesus? Or perhaps are we a bit like both? A people who recognize the light of Christ and are blinded all at the same time? Something tells me that we're probably a bit of both. And that is precisely why taking the time to bless and light a candle is so important. Rituals like Candlemas help us because they reorientate us. They invite us to open our eyes to see the blessings of Christ in our lives. The Song of Simeon, which is based on our gospel text today, is an Anglican favorite. It is said or sung at every service of evening prayer. Coming at the end of the day, it is a prayer that is so vital in refocusing our sight on Jesus. It invites us to pray with a hope that we too will see the light of Christ in our lives, that we, God's servants, will depart in peace, having seen with our own eyes God's salvation, a light to lighten the Gentiles and to be the glory of thy people. Amen.